Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending our 12th Long Range Facility Planning meeting tonight. We've got a pretty good agenda this evening. We had talked last time about potentially meeting in person. Unfortunately, we were unable to do that today. So what we'll really focus on today is kind of disseminating the information that we talked about last time. There was a lot of it, a lot of information that we went through. I know people's heads were kind of spinning at the end of that meeting. So want to really go through that, look at it in a more kind of summary form, high level, and really talk about what that means for this committee. So looking at the agenda, we'll again look at our norms right after our kind of open discussion. We'll also revisit our process diagram. We've shared a schedule that's changed pretty dramatically over the course of this last year. But what we'd like to share with you tonight is a process diagram that really gets us to the finish line and clearly outlines some of those items that need to happen in order for that to wrap up. Then we'll really look at the summary of district-wide improvements. Again, Lauren did a really great job last time bringing us all up to speed on kind of a priority 1, 2, and 3 at each individual site. And that was, again, a lot of numbers, a lot of information. So we want to look at it just at a very high level and kind of encapsulate that in a couple of diagrams and really talk about that and what does that mean. We'll also revisit, just again at a high level, some of those general obligation bond scenarios that Lauren with Piper Sandler had presented last time, just to remind everybody, what we looked at that time as it pertained to a 60, a 70, an 80, and even a $130 million bond, and how that may inform what priority really rises to the top for this committee. I think when we're all done with that and we've kind of had some time to digest that and think about it, we'd really like to take a vote with this committee just to get check the temperature of the room to see, where are we kind of leaning from our, collective perspective on which scenario works the best for Silver Falls School District as it relates to prioritization. At that time, we'll have really kind of 4 different options that we'll review. So it's a non-binding vote, if you will, but it just really gives a sense for how this committee sees those priorities and how important they are to this committee and how would we move forward with that. We'll wrap up with what did we learn? Again, we've talked about a 10-year versus a 20-year plan. What we've really dove into this far is a 10-year plan per the ODE requirements. It's the requirement to get our grant match, get that grant funding back, and also in preparation for an awesome grant, the 20-year plan and maybe even 30-year plan would be an extension to that process. And we can talk about that at the end. Again, what does that mean for this committee, a 20-year plan? So I want you to really think about that as we move through today's agenda. What do we want to look at for a 20-year plan when we reconvene? When we meet in person, there's going to be just a lot more ample opportunity to really dive into that and really kind of work in small groups and come up with some scenarios there. So I think with that, just like we've done the last few meetings, maybe start out with an open discussion. And I'll start at the top left. And believe it or not, Melissa, you're not at the top left this time. It's actually Josh.
I'm good. I'm ready to get rolling. Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Brett?
Same.
Great. Lauren?
I'm good.
Great. Ray, did you have anything you wanted to talk about?
Okay, I'm here now. Well, it's just sharing a little bit of what I've been thinking about, and so a dilemma that I see is, and I think the board needs to weigh in here and give us some input. But long range facility planning, and then we're talking quite a bit about deferred maintenance. And so to me, those kind of don't go together very well. And so I really think the board needs to give us some input as to what they're going to try to fund, I guess, on an annual basis in terms of the maintenance, and then it's bothersome to me to put deferred maintenance on a bond. That's just kind of where I'm at. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ray. Sean, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, good for now. Ready to move on.
Great, thanks, Sean. Melissa?
No, I'm good right now. Let's go.
Great, thanks. Jackie?
Same here, ready to go.
Great. Tom?
With them, good to go.
Great. Aaron Koch?
I'm good, thanks.
Liza?
Hi there. I just wanted to see if there's a way that perhaps you could email us the meeting minutes after the meeting so that we can see them. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Eliza. Steve? Good to go. Lisa?
Good evening. I don't have anything to say right now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Aaron Scott?
All good.
Colin, since you're there.
Same.
Wally?
Nothing to add, thanks.
Great. Peter?
I think Peter was double booked. And
he's double booked. Okay, great. April?
I'm good to go. Thank you.
Thanks, April. Well, that was quick. I don't think I missed anybody. Let's see here. But if I did, just please let me know. Superintendent's message. Scott, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Jonah, and welcome everyone. It's nice to be with you again. And my hope is that this is the last meeting we have to have in a two-dimensional world. And I just want to go over with you several points in my time. And the first one is just to reiterate a couple of things that Jonah said. Number one is that we hope to come back to in-person meetings. And the next meeting will be in August. We need to pause the meetings from June and July out of respect to a lot of committee members' schedules. And we will be resuming in August, hopefully in person. That's what we're planning on. We are planning on going forward to in-person meetings. And it's really important too, because we can't start talking about 20 and 30-year plans unless we're able to meet together in breakout groups, following specific protocols. And I just feel like we've lost so much of that this year by having to be in this Zoom world where people have the option of turning off their cameras and not engaging versus being in person. It just makes a world of difference. So just know that that's on the horizon. Having said that, I want to address a really important topic. And this topic keeps coming up on the committee, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And the word that keeps coming up is this idea of consolidation around several of our K-8 schools. And what I hear the committee saying is that we don't know if consolidation is really what our K-8 communities want because we've never asked them formally. And that's the messaging that I'm getting. And for the record, from the folks that I've spoken to this year, and I continue to speak to from those communities, at least for me, it's become clear that they absolutely do not want consolidation. But then again, that's anecdotal evidence for me. And so that's not good enough to satisfy the curiosity of this committee. So as a result, during this pause, I'm forming a superintendent's work group. And I want to lead the work in finding a formal answer to that question. But I want to make sure that this is done in a thoughtful, transparent, and doing it the right way. So I've gone ahead and hired Jerry Colonna from Colonna Educational Services. Jerry is, in my opinion, the most respected consultant in education in the state of Oregon. Many of you know him from his listening sessions and the work that he did on the Silver Falls School District Strategic Plan. And if you've met Jerry, then what I'm saying about him should line up for you as well. He is literally beyond reproach. And so he and I have been speaking. We just had some communication today. We're scheduling an initial meeting next week. And over the next month, I will be recruiting individuals, some of whom from this committee. If I haven't spoken to you yet, I will be speaking to you. I will have approximately 20 members in this work group, many of whom will be influential members from our K-8 communities, but we will have broad representation. I just want to make sure that I'm clear what our work is going to be. But I also want to be clear that this work group's charge is not to give me feedback on whether or not the consolidation is a good idea. What the charge of this work group will be is helping me design a process where we can go about getting our K-8 families to the table so I can hear directly from them. And we can only do that in large numbers in a town hall style format in the fall if I have the help of this work group and with influential members of our different K-8 communities. Because I want to put this to rest once and for all in a formalized document. And if when we bring our K-8 families together and it turns out that the overwhelming feeling is that they're not interested in consolidation, then that will be a topic that will be off the table when we come back in the fall. And I will come back to you as a long-range facilities planning committee with a document to share with you the findings of these listening sessions, even though they'll be open to the public, and to be able to square that away. Now, we've been talking about August or September for the next meeting, and it's probably looking like late August, just so you know, just to clarify. And the timeline that we will share with you is a draft right now. And the reason why it's a draft is because we're not quite sure, give or take a month, and depending on the type of work that needs to get done. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And the last thing I want to mention about this topic is that each one of you has my cell phone number. And so if you have a question, concern, or issue that you want to talk about, or something's keeping you up at night, I really want you to call me. This is not an 8 to 5 job for me. This is a 24/7 lifestyle as a public school superintendent. I'm only here for one reason, and that's to serve at the will of the community. And the community is all of Silver Falls. So if you have something you want to talk about, please, by all means, text me or call me. Always find time to sit down with you, to talk in person or over the phone, your choice on that. But I can't say that enough, that I pride myself on making time to be accessible to all of you. And I haven't had many of you take me up on that offer. Some of you have. But if you have a problem or concern going forward, please let me know about it. I would like to take a proactive approach and be a part of the conversation. And finally, going forward, if any committee member has a question or request for information, or an issue that they need solved, that I want all of those requests and questions to come to me directly. And then I will make sure where the work flows to after that. So that will ensure that these things get followed up on. And then if I can answer the questions, I will. If I can, I will certainly find the right person who can provide an answer. But I would like to be the central nexus of communication going forward. And if it's something for Jonah, you could send it to me first, I'll forward it on. I just want to make sure that we're clear on the communication piece. I know that was a source of confusion, and I just want to make sure that that's crystal clear. And finally, and Jonah, if you could scroll to the next slide, I'd sure appreciate it. I just want to summarize where we are. And I included a slide to kind of summarize the work this summer. And I just need to blow my screen. And so the work this summer, it's going to start. We're going to start in late June. By about mid-June, I should have the work group set. And remember, that's a superintendent's work group, which means that's my work group that I'm setting up. So I'm working out a process for selecting individuals, then contacting individuals, and that's going to take me a little bit of time. And Jerry Colonna will be with me, as he will be a facilitator. And the reason why I want him in particular is because we want to ensure an unbiased outcome. So when I come to you with a report, all of the committee the work group members rather, who have helped establish the process that Jerry and I will facilitate, you will know that it was done in a transparent way, because they will all sign off on that. We'll meet several times in the summer with the work group, and in the fall, we will be conducting listening sessions, in-person listening sessions. And again, the focus of the work group is to provide me with feedback on the process, to get feedback from the community and get folks to turn out and have their voices heard, have our K-8 families at the table. And so having said that, I think that's a lot of information. And of course, again, you have my cell phone number, and I'm happy to reiterate any of this or answer any questions that you have. But just know that as a result of this work, I'll be coming back to you to present that. We will also be presenting the new school board this summer in August with an update at either the August regular board meeting or the board work session on where we are, a status report on the long-range facilities planning, because we need to get that wrapped up by late December. And so having said that, thank you for giving me a little bit of time, and I've been looking forward to tonight. And Jonah, I think I can turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate that. With that, let's dive really quickly into our norms for the long-range facility planning committee work. Again, all of these we don't really have an issue with, but I just wanted to revisit them. Be respectful of others' ideas, opinions, and questions. Be engaged and actively participate. I think when we come back in person, that will be even more robust. There are no bad ideas. Meetings start on time. When we wrap up this work, it's really important that you become ambassadors for the project, and even during the work, it's important that you become ambassadors for the project. Be open-minded and think outside the box. That notion of consensus decision-making. This is a committee that's based around consensus decision-making. Be a good listener. Keep the needs of the students first. Again, we are an advisory group, so final decisions will be made by the new incoming school board that Scott had talked about. But our recommendation will go forward to them. And then most importantly, have fun. That consensus decision making, just again, more detail to that. It's about really honoring the input of each committee member. That's why we've really opened up in the beginning and at the end to give that input, and then also throughout. It's about working together as a board committee so that everyone understands on the committee how decisions were made and why those decisions were made the way they were. It's about honoring all the foundational work that's been done to date. So I know that we'll all be really looking forward to the work coming out of the work group this summer, as that will be very foundational to wrapping up this long range plan. We've been keeping a running list of a parking lot for ideas as they come up. Lately, we've kind of coalesced around more consensus since the 8th long range facility planning meeting. So we've been really kind of honing in on that for the most part. And if there's any coming to an agreement, we basically put it to a vote. And we'll do that again tonight, for the long range plan, kind of moving forward there. Those guiding principles that were developed early on in the process: protect our community's investments in all Silver Falls School District schools, provide a safe and high quality learning environment for all students in all buildings, and spend our tax dollars as wisely as possible. We talked a little bit about this earlier, and Scott really kind of set the stage for this is a draft. And so this is really kind of what we're starting with and how we're looking to continue the work. As Scott had mentioned, really starting in earnest in June with the work group. Right now, you see really kind of 3 meetings outlined. Whether or not it's 3, and maybe more, I think that's TBD. But that just kind of gives a sense for some rigor there during the summer. When we come back, we will meet with the school board in August, where we'll look to present the progress of this long range facility planning process and all the work that's happened in the last year. But in addition to that, I think at that time, we'll look to have some findings from that K-8 work group. At that time also, we'd like to look at having that community forum and really actually getting out in a larger setting and presenting to the community. And hopefully that can happen in person. And we won't be just sitting on our hands here in the summer. That'll be a really good opportunity for us to engage with the city of Silverton. If you remember a couple meetings ago, we really developed an approach for the middle school. And we just really want to define some of those agency requirements, on and off-site improvements needed, and just make sure that we're capturing all of that in our long-range facility plan. When we come back in September and possibly August, again, that's really dependent on kind of what happens in the next few months in our coordination with Scott and his group. We'll reconvene and present the findings, I think, from that K-8 work group. And then really just remind everybody where we were and where we are to pick that work back up. And then the following subsequent month, we'll be looking to finalize our recommendation. And why October is so important that we finalize that recommendation is we really need time to actually draft the plan so that it can make it in time for the end of year submission to ODE in order for the district to get their dollars for that. So that's really, it's a 2-month process to draft that plan. So that's kind of the reason for that. At that time, we'd like to meet with the board again to present that final recommendation by this committee in preparation for drafting that plan. And then also present to the community at that time that final recommendation for drafting the plan. Once we're kind of midway through drafting the plan, we'd like to come back to the board and present a draft of that, and then kind of what it looks like in submission for ODE at the end of the year. And then again in December, we'll meet our deadline to submit the draft, the plan to the state in order to meet that requirement. And any work that happens, before that and after that, as we mentioned before, the plan is not just a plan and that's it. It's a living document, and it's revisited, often, and it's just a baseline to start from. So that's kind of some thoughts on the draft of the process moving forward. I don't know, Scott, did you have anything you wanted to add, or Steve, or anybody before we move from this?
Nope, I think that's good, Jonah.
Great. Again, I mentioned earlier, we went through a lot of information last time. Lauren just is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the needs of the district, and keeping students warm, safe, and dry, and really looking at those accessibility items, in addition to some of the program stuff. So these are really just, these next 3 slides are an encapsulation of all that great feedback as it related to priority 1, 2, and 3, that we talked about last time. You can see at the bottom right-hand corner, that's really kind of the total sum at that time. This does include the middle school replacement, and then escalation, a normal escalation, if you will. Right now we're kind of seeing, pretty crazy escalation. Hopefully when we come out of this, we'll get back to normal there. But the different colors in the bars correspond to really just shell, interiors, furnishings, services, site work, other for the most part, not always the case, but for the most part, it corresponds to accessibility upgrades. That's a good way of thinking about it, but it also corresponds to just items that don't fit within that prescribed ODE spreadsheet, that Lauren and BBL had worked with together. That's part of the state requirements. You can see kind of at a glance here, when we look at that first priority, that $68 million dollar bucket, there's a lot of the dollars that go into the Silverton Middle School replacement. And that's not shown here just because that would really skew the chart pretty dramatically. What you're seeing there, that 1.06 million, is just that priority 1 for improvements to the gym building itself, that the portion that we're keeping. And you can kind of start seeing some of the improvements throughout the district. In town is really this kind of pink for the in-town K5s. You can see those improvements. You could see Central Howell, K8, Prattam, Evergreen, smaller schools. So it makes sense that the improvements are much smaller than these larger schools. Butte Creek, again, is a larger school, so you can start seeing some of those improvements and how they weight out against the other ones. Scotts Mills, Victor Point, K8, Silvercrest, K8, 1.28 million. And then again, in that priority 1, really just trying to keep the dollar value down. We really looked at deferring Silverton High School improvements and the stadium improvements as they weren't as high of a priority as some of these other schools.
Hey, Jonah, now this is the 15% of the maintenance budgets needed. Is that what this chart is?
Essentially, Josh, that was kind of the target at that time. If you remember,
yeah,
we said it would kind of sort of flux a little bit. And that got us close to about 64 million at that time. But once we started looking at the priorities and what was really needed, it grew a little bit.
Okay.
And may I ask, the division is based on priorities as Lauren identified them rather than on the student body? Is that how I'm interpreting this, or correct interpretation?
The interpretation, the priorities were based on, working with Lauren, working with the BBL, facility assessment, but in conjunction with understanding the needs of the principals and the schools and all the different needs at each individual site. So it's not really a black and white kind of scenario. It's really Lauren knowing the maintenance needs and what's really critical, coupled with, what do those schools want, from, kind of just meeting with them, and just understanding them. So it's kind of all of the above, if you will, Tom. That makes sense. Is that a good way of saying it, Lauren?
Yeah, this is based on the building needs and the projects, but it's not based on the student body. And it's not perfect either. It's not like 10% or 15% for each school, because based on the projects and the costs, some might be a little more, some might be a little less, etc. Obviously, some buildings have more need than others.
Do those things that pertain to the shell, is that mostly roofing?
Yes, a lot of that's roofing in this section here.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of it's different, Eliza. You know, mostly roofing, like Lauren said, but there's some things like Mark Twain, as an example, has some panel siding in there in that priority one. You know, Robert Frost is really roofing. Central Howell didn't really have anything for shell in that priority one. Neither did Prattam. Evergreen had some windows, doors, and then some roof coverings. Butte Creek had a single ply roof covering. Scotts Mills really had quite a bit. The framed panel siding, some wood exterior windows, some aluminum steel exterior windows, single ply roof coverings, and then metal roof coverings. There's just a lot of kind of shell needs at Scotts Mills. So it's kind of, it really depends on the needs, but for the most part, it's roofing.
And Jonah, please, kind of reiterate the fact that these correspond directly to the data you shared last time with the priority 1, priority 2. So anybody that has that list, they can look through it and kind of connect and correlate those two.
Yep, that's a good, thanks for pointing that out, Richard.
Yeah, I guess that's why I was asking, because it did seem like roofing was like the main shell thing that I recall from last meeting, but maybe there was more siding that I didn't recognize or whatever. I was just a little surprised that Butte Creek still needs so much roofing after all of the work that they did on the gym and everything, but I know that's a large school. Thank you.
Yeah, we got a roof on the main building, a good portion of the main building at Butte Creek in the seismic project, and then the cafeteria got a new roof, but the gym itself and the middle school wing and the covered play area are all old roofing. And that's what we're looking at there.
Moving on here to priority 2. Priority 2, if you include all of that with the escalation and project development costs, equated to about 81.5 million. And that included all of the priority 1 work. In addition to that was, you see a lot more of the other, which has a lot more of the accessibility upgrades at each site. What's really interesting, I think, is just kind of how you see the chart starting to correspond. For the most part, it kind of stays pretty, static. And what that means is that distribution really is almost commensurate with just the need at each school. These are in brackets of 2 million, whereas the one before that was in 1 million, and the next one will be in 3 million. But you kind of see that the big needs, just again, based on the size for the most part, and the square footage is at Mark Twain and Robert Frost, with Butte Creek being up there as well. We still don't see any improvements at the high school with this priority 2, but you do see a little bit of improvements at the stadium with that priority 2, and that's really just replacement of some of the painted structure and painting some of the exposed steel structure. So it's really kind of a paint up maintenance item there.
Jonah, hold on real quick for me. So you're saying the estimated bond for option 2 is 81.5 million. What was the one under option 1?
The one under option 1 was about 68.
Okay.
Yep.
And are we going to go into details why there's a $4 million jump on Mark Twain. I'm just curious. Do you have that listed somewhere later on?
Yeah, and again, as Richard mentioned, Josh, we do have that from last meeting.
Okay.
That corresponding, and we do also have that here, and we can share that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Jonah, on the stadium, was the concession stand or something along those lines was included in the middle school cost, correct? When you guys did that final?
Yeah, we'd want to wrap that up into all those site development costs, basically. It'd be kind of a more inexpensive structure.
So, okay, so when you're talking stadium, that excludes the concession stand area because that's hopefully included in the bond for the middle school.
That would ideally be included in that
Thanks.
bond. Yep. So looking at priority 3, this one gets up to about 94.5 million. Mark Twain is at 8.4. Robert Frost is at 4.26. So you really start seeing more improvements, quite a bit more at these schools once you start jumping up, because that middle school for the most part stays pretty static, with the exception of some of those priorities of the gym that are pretty big needs there coming into that. You do see at the high school at that third priority a need for replacement of roofing, or I'm sorry, the chiller, and that was kind of the big piece there.
There's also some DDC controls in there.
Yep.
Sorry, what is the chiller?
It's basically it's air conditioning that provides AC to most of the building. It chills water, and then the water's pumped throughout the building to the cooling coils, and then that distributes air that's air conditioned.
We also have some improvements to some of the roadways and parking lots and pedestrian paving, some overlays at those areas, and then, as Lauren mentioned, some of the DDC stuff there.
And just to clarify, in talking about these things, this is really to just do maintenance, but functionality of the school is not affected by these monies. Am I hearing that correctly?
No, not necessarily, Tom. I mean, there's a lot of it that is maintenance, but there's a lot of it that's in accessibility improvements and restrooms and things like that. So kind of in that other category, that's where those fall for the most part. But a lot of it is maintenance. And yeah, and we have that detail from that last meeting if you wanted to reference some of that and kind of dive into that a little bit more for each one of those individual items.
Thank you.
So some of the systems, Joan, I wanted to point out, some of the systems are at the end of their useful life, or there have been changes in the code requirements. And so those things are beyond just maintaining or maintenance. So it's semantics, but I think it's an important difference between, the system, like a roof, has provided coverage for the students for many, many years, and it's finally reached its end of useful life projected by the manufacturers of the project. So just something to think about in terms of what is maintenance and what is a replacement of systems that have served the district.
Thanks, Richard. So those are kind of the real 3 brackets, if you will, at all the sites. Is there any other questions related to this? And we can always come back and circle back if we want to, and go into more detail on any of these individual items.
I was trying to look it up real quick, and I haven't be able to pull up my phone, but the stadium, 350,000, what's the jump there? I'm trying, I didn't get to it fast enough, so I'll just ask you.
Yeah, no problem at all, Colin. That one is patch concrete slab at tennis courts and repaint, and then replace the wood frame press box.
Okay, so I wanted to ask Lauren, is there anything going on with the track? Because I know right now we're not hosting any track meets or anything because it's in poor condition. So is that something that's in the athletic budget, or is there nothing planned for that right now?
Well, actually, I think James is working on that, on trying to get that done sooner rather than later, because of what he stated, that they currently can practice on it, but they cannot have meets.
So that's something he's working on the athletic budget that wouldn't be out of the bond, hopefully.
Yeah, it was listed in the plan, but yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask really quickly, what is the average life expectancy of a new roof?
That's a good question. Oh, go ahead, Lauren. I'll let
I was
you.
going to say it depends on the roof. Okay, so there's a variety of different types of roofing. What we have on most of our buildings is a single ply Duralast roof. It's basically got a 15-year warranty on it, versus your built-up roofs basically have a longer warranty, and especially if you go with something that's a little bit more bulletproof, like a Garland or a Trimco. They tend to have a 30 to 50 year life, 30-year warranty, and they're just a lot easier to maintain and patch if you do have any issues.
Okay, so when we were going through the roofing last meeting, you mentioned many times that there was single ply roof, and I just assumed that you were going to make it into a roof that would be a longer term roof, but actually you'd be replacing it with what's already existing.
No, that's not what's in here. That's not what's planned, because you already have two roofs on most of these buildings. You have a built up underneath that failed, that they went over because at the time it was the cheapest option they could do with a single ply roof. And so what we have in here would be to remove both of those roofs and then put a new built up roofing system on there. So
we would be looking at more like our 30-year warranted roofs.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's good. I mean, 30 years is a lot longer than 15, so.
Yes, and if it has a 30-year warranty, I mean, you're going to get a little more time out of it than that. So most of these single ply roofs are, over 20 years old. So.
So this slide here, you've seen this before. This just has kind of encapsulates all those needs as it relates to the priorities, priority 1, 2, and 3. And then you can see the middle school there. We estimated about 85,000 square feet. Again, using those ODE numbers for middle school replacement, for just the construction was around 37 million for that, is what we were targeting. And then there'd be the project development costs on top of that. The priority 1, 2, and 3, you can see that there's the target, back to your point, Josh, where we had the 15%. This kind of shows you how these aligned with that. And again, some of them are pretty spot on, like Central Howell and Prattam with that priority 1. But you could ask Lauren. We had quite a challenge just really coming up with that, a number that got close to that because of all those needs at each site. So some of them are a little bit lower, and then these are all cumulative. So that 2 million plus 2.6 plus 1.4 basically would get you to that priority 3 for that overall budget. So these are really additive. That 13 adds on top of the 68, and then that 12.9 adds on top of that 13.4, which adds on top of that 68, if that makes some sense there. Again, as a reminder, we have escalation in there at 5.6. Now, I caveat this with, just you've seen it, you've walked around the lumber store, the hardware store, you've seen it on social media, on the news. Escalation is really, really crazy right now. And, you can talk to contractors that will tell you that in Q1 of 2021, they've been escalating at about 4% per month. And so there's it's just, it's all over the place. 5.6 is a more reasonable, and we suspect, the market suspects, if you will, and contractors and anybody you talk to in the industry, that it should start leveling back out in October and November of this year is the hope. But it's just, you know, it's pretty insane out there. So there's no way for us to project that. It's just, you can't really, it's unprecedented, to be honest.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but regarding the escalation, I don't understand. I would like to know, is this for what the bond value might need to be when in November 2022 or spring or November of 2023?
Yeah, this is projected out to basically 2022. It would have to be increased for 2023. And I know we haven't really decided on that, but it's probably likely 2023 is when the bond would go. So we would want to look at that escalation number again. This is kind of a snapshot of where we are at this time.
So to do like priority 3, we'd probably be looking at running like $100 million bond rather than a $95 million bond.
Potentially, you potentially would, but again, we don't really know what that escalation is going to look like, and if it may dip down even further once we kind of recover.
Okay, thank you.
It's literally a crystal ball at this point, and there's no way to really project that. So if you remember, and it was in the board books, Lauren did a really great job. The Laurens did a really great job presenting last time. Lauren with the priorities at each site, and then Lauren with Piper Sandler for the bond rates and kind of what we could see and what those scenarios could look like. Again, these were just targets that they were looking at, and whatever Silver Falls School District decides to go with, that will be recalculated and readjusted to show that. But this gives you that range. This is where you're at now. And basically, we're in 2021, and you kind of start seeing some of those 2020 bonds, or I'm sorry, 2013 there, and then it kind of levels out at $2 assessed value there. That's just the existing. The 60 million, if you remember, the way Lauren described it is it's kind of a stepped scenario where and potentially in the front end you could look at stepping up to about 3.25 assessed value, and then after about 6 years that drops back down to $1.50, which gets you to kind of your pre-2009 rates. And Steve, please feel free at any time if I say something incorrectly, correct me. 70 million, again, step scenario there, with about 8 years up at 3.25, and then dropping down to about $1.75, a little bit under that for the life of the bond thereafter. The 80 million, again, 3.25, but it really drops down to 175. So not a whole lot more for that dollar amount. If we looked at more of a kind of a flat scenario and trying to maintain the current levy rate, this is what it really looks like for 20 years, and that's basically at 225 for that 20, or about 210.
That one increases the total cost of the bond. How much?
This is at 60 million.
Right, but the total cost we reimburse would be like 10%, 20% higher.
Oh, that's a good question, Tom. I actually don't know off the top of my head here. Let's see here. You wouldn't happen to have that information, would you, Steve, on that one?
On this scenario, it's just to keep the dollar amount per thousand equal throughout, even while it retires the previous bond. So to keep it closer to the $2 per thousand instead of targeting a slightly higher rate early and then coming down lower for the rest of the bonds. There's just a different structure on the 60 million.
If you were to target at a higher rate earlier, then wouldn't that save you some cost on the overall total?
Yeah, I don't have that full presentation here in front of me, and I wasn't at the last meeting, but I could look that up. Yeah.
Similarly, the 70 million jumps up closer to 250 there for that kind of flat rate. And then 80 would be a little bit over 250 there, so about 260. It's kind of the synopsis there.
And historically, if I remember correctly, when I was looking back in the 90s, we did float bonds that were about $3 per thousand, and then it's kind of fluctuated over the last 25 years, if I remember correctly. Do you have that information? Anyone else?
Yeah, Lauren's presentation only went back to 2001, so we'd have to look back further for anything prior to that. But you can see there between 2008 and 2013, when the high school bond was passed, we jumped all the way up to 350 per thousand for for 5 or 6 years, and then it came back down. The rate actually the last handful of years has been even lower than projected, just because we've added more market value and therefore assessed value in the district boundaries than even projected. So it's spread the cost out a little bit and actually brought that dollar per thousand down even more. So you can see that we have been down closer to that $2 mark, where I don't think it was expected to be quite. I think it was about $2.03 here the last year or two, and that's even lower than what was expected when it came down. So that's been helpful as well. And then of course we did refinance the existing debt that we have 7 years on. Back in September, we took advantage of the low treasury rates, historic lows, and as a result, we're going to save $1.3 million in interest costs for the taxpayers over the last 7 years of the existing debt payoff.
And then the last one that Lauren shared, if you remember at the very end, was that $130 million general obligation bond. And that basically over the life of 30 years, that got us just over $3 assessed value. And all of the your question there, all of the ones before this one were 20-year. So this one is the only 30-year scenario that's shown. But that, at a very high level, that kind of gives you a sense of those different scenarios, different ways you can approach those. And if you remember, this is that comparison just right now where Silver Falls falls between all the districts, and they always kind of like to try to weight you in the middle there, just so you can see Gladstone's up there, $4, whereas Gervais is down at 0. So, they haven't passed. I think they've gone for a bond 6 times in the last 25 years and haven't got above 43%. So that's kind of you'd be about comparable to Canby and Lake Oswego currently is where you fall on the bond rate.
So just to come back to Eliza's and Tom's question too, sorry to interrupt, Jonah. On page 6 of Lauren McMillan's presentation here, I have it in front of me now. The total interest, so on a $60 million scenario, for example, on the levy rate up front, so jumping to 325 and then coming back down to 153 later, The total interest cost, well, and again, this is with true interest cost of 4.09, which is built in a 2% buffer based on where rates are now to be conservative. But that interest cost was a little over $32 million on a 20-year payoff. And then in a $60 million combined level levy, where it stays the same the whole time, the interest is $10 million more at a 4.25% rate. The rate's slightly higher, but it's 42 million. So it's $10 million more in a rate in a structure like that.
And that was on the 60 million.
That was on the 60 million. Yeah. And it's $10 million more on a 70 million, and it's $10 million more on an 80 million as well.
Okay. So it kind of stays pretty close there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So kind of with all that information, you know, again, we had a lot more detail at the last meeting when we talked about that with Lauren and Lauren presenting and the priorities at each site. This again, you know, we talked about it earlier, really kind of wanting to just get a gut check for this committee and what the committee thinks the community would support as it relates to those priorities. What we are targeting here, and just looking at this is kind of that priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, but also the 130. And really that 130 is just, you know, you've seen what it looks like from a tax rate standpoint. Obviously, we haven't shared anything with you that would get you to the 130 million, but you know, there was some interest from this committee, from some people in the committee. So again, this is really just kind of a gut check for where do people think they are in their community and what the community might support. Again, it's not binding. This is not necessarily a recommendation, but we just really wanted to kind of get some thoughts as it relates to that before we move into the summer. This could really kind of, I think, help form a little bit that work in the summer. And then as we come back, just as a frame of reference for where the committee has that recommendation. So what we have is those 4 options, basically giving everybody 2 choices, kind of, you know, what if you were to pick 2, what would be those 2? And so if there's no questions, we might just do that poll here, Maddie. Maddie, are you there? Oh.
So I want to be clear really quick before we take this vote. Are we voting for one of these options right now? Is that what we're doing? One of the 3?
That's correct. One of those.
Okay.
Or
so to be clear, then we're not then going to proceed going forward, giving the school board options of different things. This is currently what we're voting on right now. This is going to be this committee's idea of what our 10-year plan is going to be. Is that what I'm hearing?
This basically what would be presented to the board would be, you know, this is the work to date, this is the priorities that were presented to the committee, and this is kind of where the committee was leaning, basically. But as you remember, the board really has the final say on that.
So, but okay, I mean, I guess I would really like, some more community feedback before I make this vote on behalf of the community. I guess, yeah, that's all. I just feel, okay, all right. I'll figure.
I'd like to weigh in. I heard, if I recall correctly, Scott talking about getting some more information this summer doing some, talking to the community and then adding recommendations. So how does that tie in with what we're talking about right now?
Well, that I'll be doing is around the essential question that keeps coming up in this committee around consolidation. So, and that's a huge chunk to bite off, because we want to make sure that that question is put to rest and that we're following a specific process. So if there are other questions that need to be addressed, I would need to hear that from the committee. But as far as that work group's charge, that's what it would be. Doesn't
that tie in with what we're talking about right now, though?
Well, it could, but I think I think the essential question is we want to gather what the voices in the communities are feeling. And I think we could add in all manner of questions that are attached to that, because everything's really is connected to this. So not sure if that gives you the answer you want, Tom.
I primarily am thinking that if we collect information that kind of speaks to maybe a bigger picture, that this vote we're having today doesn't really lock us in. I don't want there to be a bowling ball going down the hill and not able to redirect it.
Right. This is the way I'd look at this, Tom, is that this is just one way to just get a sense and into this.
This is what we'd probably call a dipstick. We call it a formative assessment in the classroom. So it's just to get a feel for where we are as a group.
Yeah, I think, as we discussed this in the planning, actually the idea was to just pick two, and it's not locking in anything. It's just, just like Scott said, to kind of get a pulse for where people are at, because we've talked about a number of different amounts and scopes to a potential bond. So as we take a 3.5 month recess from this committee, just to get an idea where people sit now. Obviously, as we go through the summer, people might have a different feeling when they come back. But since we're taking a break and we've had a lot of discussions, talked about a lot of numbers, knowing that the middle school is kind of front center with this, then they're in all these plans, and the new middle schools in all these plans. What would be the kind of the appetite of the people in this group right now in terms of everything that's been looked at over the last several months? Just to kind of get a flavor.
I'm struggling with what I personally might like as opposed to what I think the community would support. So it makes it really tough for me to.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's kind of why we gave two options there, Ray.
Yeah.
Just to get a sense for that.
So you're telling us that we can vote for two?
Yeah, you can vote for.
Well, it's not letting me vote, period. So.
Yeah, it says that the panelists cannot vote.
Oh.
Hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Is Maddie, are you on the line?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it does show a message in red at the bottom right now. It says host and panelists cannot vote. Is that something that could be easily fixed? I don't care about me voting. I'm not voting anyway. So
that kind of brings up a point too, which is that there's 20 people on this call that aren't part of BLRB, and of those 20, I think 5 are, at least 5 are SFSD people.
We don't. So, yeah, we don't vote.
We don't vote, Eliza.
We don't.
So vote. So it's going to be a vote up from 15 people approximately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wish more people would attend the meetings, and I am concerned still that there aren't people who represent Central Howell and Prattham.
Can you tell me again what you're going to do with this information? because I just don't see what the value of a vote at this point in time is.
So this, as Scott had mentioned, Ray, this is really just to get kind of that dipstick, just to get a understanding of where we think we are. A lot of times when you look at bonds, there's a, there'll be a dollar amount that the community, the committee, and it's always the committee, and it's always the school board and the district that really decide that and kind of bring that together. And they'll work the bond to match that dollar amount a lot of times. This is it's just one quantitative data point, just like everything that we've done in the last year is just kind of getting a sense for where this is. This isn't going to be, 15 people voted for 64.2, so it's going to be 64.2. It just kind of gives a sense for what do we think. This committee, you've been charged as ambassadors to this process to really kind of get a thoughts related to that. It's a way for us to really summarize the work going into the summer. We'll come back and revisit it, and you can come back in the fall and say, you know what, I don't think that 64.2. I've been talking to people in the community, which I hope you have been talking to people in the community as ambassadors for the project and for the long range facility planning process. To say, hey, I've talked to my neighbors, I've talked to other people, and they really think that that's way too high or that's way too low. That's really the point of the consensus making. And again, going back to being an ambassador for the project, you all have been entrusted with having an understanding of the community and to be talking to the community. And so it's not binding. We wouldn't be saying, Ray said that you did 64.2, so that's what you're getting, if that is a concern.
Well, it's just that when we did the scenario, when we chose scenario D or whatever, that kind of locked us in to that vote direction. So I think that a lot of us are probably feeling a little hesitant to lock ourselves into something. Also, with some of the discussion that hasn't, like Ray started this meeting discussing the idea of how much this bond will go toward deferred maintenance. And I do agree with the warm, safe, and dry approach, but I do think that perhaps we were also looking at doing some other modern updates, which I do see there's a lot of tech updates, especially if we add in priority 2, that can really start to help modernize the buildings really well. So I just wanted to give that feedback.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Eliza. And I think
I guess let me say something in my observation too. Sorry, Jonah. Like Scott said, I think this is just kind of a dipstick temperature check, right? Where does this committee feel? And again, this is a very rough way, but kind of in our virtual world, this is the best way to do it. Maybe that is priority 1 something we should maybe continue talking down, or 2 or 3. And I think this poll is a way just for us to say, what are we feeling? Do we want to shoot them in and go for the priority 3, or do we feel like it's maybe better just to pull back and concentrate on priority 1 from here on out, or 2? So I guess I see this as not locking us in. It's just, again, taking the temperature check of the room, the virtual room that is, and just seeing where our heads are as a committee, kind of like we did when we were doing the one for the middle school design. That's how I see it.
Right. I think that's a good way of putting it, Aaron. Absolutely.
Yeah, can I just come in real quick? I have some reservations, primarily because the last time we did a temperature check, it landed us into basically these 4 scenarios, and that wasn't my idea about how that vote was going. It was going to lead us down a path that would get us to here. So it seems kind of the same. We're doing a temperature check, and my concern is that it's locking us in like it didn't the last time we did it.
Okay.
I second Peter's statement. I think if you give us these 4 numbers, now we have a month or whatever in August, we can talk to the community members about it, maybe then get the idea and then vote. But I think doing it right now, I agree with Peter.
Okay. Well, we don't necessarily have to vote.
Does anybody else on the committee that's here tonight have a differing point of view?
I actually think it's good to narrow down our scope as soon as we can and focus. So I think it'd be good to vote.
Others?
Can we just vote and agree that this isn't going to lock us in?
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking for the mute button, and I agree with you, Brett. I think Jonah did say in the very beginning, it's non-binding, and I think it really would kind of give the entire committee, the information is for the committee to see where everybody else is anonymously. So I agree with you, Brett. Thank you very much. And by the way, BLRB is not going to vote.
Okay, so here's my thing. As long as we vote and as we're true to what we're saying from the beginning, is that this is not locking us in and things can change, like this is a liquid discussion, that I'm all fine with voting. I just want to have trust and confidence that that's what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Because I really feel uneased a little bit about asking for these numbers without figuring out what the community wants. I know what I might like, but it not be maybe what's best for the people who I'm trying to represent. So that's the only reason I'm hesitant.
Yeah. And I agree with you. Couldn't be more accurate. It's very, very valuable that this committee takes the summer to discuss the information that you've received, the magnitude of that information and what it means to them. And then you come back with really some good information that this would be revisited, and you can kind of analyze it at that time. This is where we voted in May, and here we are now. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point, Richard, because we can get, a compass reading now and then get waypoints, because we can compare it to what it'll be in August. But as with any work, we've got to get a reading on where we are. It's somehow, and if we don't, my fear is that we'll keep spinning and spinning, and that this process, won't end. And we have to be willing to take that step with imperfect information sometimes, just to have it to compare to something else. So,
can we have it documented that at least a number of members of the committee have spoken and identified that this is a rough guide and not a specific vote.
Sure, Tom.
Yep, we'll get that in.
Keep in mind, everybody, these meetings are recorded as well, and so to capture the posterity for posterity reasons, what it is we're talking about in the context.
Yeah, and I think that when we reconvene in the fall and kind of work through the process again, we'll look at it and we'll say this is where we thought we were at the end of the year last year. Does that feel right still? I think that will kind of at least gives us some foundational work to start from. And it may not be right. You may talk to neighbors and colleagues and the community, and likewise we'll be doing the same. But it gives us just that temperature check. And we'll capture that in the minutes, Tom, for sure.
I do feel that it might be good if we come up with a way for over the summer to be doing some communication about the bond being repaid, and that our current, debt, and the fact that they were able to refinance and save $1.3 million. That's one of the things that I think really needs to be spread around the community more. I definitely tried sharing it recently to deaf ears, but hopefully it was at least witnessed by a few people, on Facebook. But I think that working on trying to explain how bond repayment would be made is really important as we go forward to, about how it will probably stay at a level rate, or that we could save $10 million by bumping it up for a few years. Things like that, I think, would be very valuable.
And I think dovetailing on what Eliza is sharing too, I think that's helpful. And I think we also have to get down, if we choose kind of some of the like some scenarios of where we want to go to the public with over the next few months, whether it be at 60, 90, 100, whatever the scenario we feel is best. I would really love to have the brass tacks, how much per $100,000, so what kind of numbers that we can share with the community. Because if you say, well, we were going to go for a $90 million bond plus a $4 million grant, they're like, okay, great. What does that mean for me? Well, it means for your, $350,000 home, it's going to cost you X in taxes. That's what I want to know as a taxpayer. So if we could have those figures, I think that would be awesome as well. Kind of after we hone in on what where our guts are telling us the level needs to be. Again, I'd like to have that per $100,000 or per thousand figure, whatever the estimate is, on how much those scenarios would be actually to the taxpayer.
I think that's a really good point.
That's going to be really key, because these big figures mean nothing to people.
Yeah.
So it's going to cost them out of their own pocketbook.
Yeah. I want to know how much I'm paying in taxes more, once this new bond, if it passes, compared to what I am now, right? And that's what we have to articulate.
Along with that, I believe it might be something like for a $300 million home, that I'm sorry, a $300,000 home. I know
it's a nice house
around here, but that's pretty extreme. No, but that it would be like $750 a year for our current bond repayment. But then we also pay for schools in other ways within our taxes. And I wonder if we could learn more about maybe what those other, for like the general fund education bond, general fund.
Yeah, there's a permanent rate for just for the general operating piece that's been locked in since the 90s with Measure 5 or 3, whatever it was. But I think it's $4.88, I believe, per thousand. But yeah, as far as the presentation Lauren McMillan did does have the cost per thousand assessed value for every scenario, which is very helpful. But you're right, Eliza, there's a lot of education that would go in, and then having simple charts for people to say, well, if you have a $300,000 home, it's going to cost you this, or put some easy to calculate scenarios out there for people, and also to make sure people understand that it's based on their assessed value, not their real market value, and that for some folks there's quite a difference there.
Yeah,
and it's actually could be a lower number than people think when people have a significant gap between that assessed value and the real market value. That's not the same for everybody out there, but that's a very important piece of education.
And I think going back again to simplicity's sake, Steve, that's helpful to know, like kind of what our, that $4 figure, whatever it was, as part of our fixed cost. But I think the biggest thing is being able to articulate that delta. Mm-hmm. What am I paying now? Yep. I'm going to vote for this bond, and what am I going to pay if it passes? And maybe I'm too simple. I don't know. It's just the way I think. And, we got to be able to articulate that, with all due precision to our community.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like right now, if the average across the district is just a tick over $2, now that's not the same for everyone. That's an average out there. You're looking at the $200 per $100,000 of assessed value. If you have a $300,000 home, it's $600 a year. So,
yeah.
But that type of information and charts, and definitely it has to be part of education throughout the process, and even once a bond campaign is started in terms of just basic information. Once a bond campaign does go forward, the district can only provide information, not solicitation. That's when a public a PAC group would have to be formed for that type of thing. But it is very important to educate on that.
Along with that, I think that with the way that the financial conditions are of right now being so confusing because of everything we've been through in the last year and a half, it kind of would make sense to me that we probably wouldn't want to look at like jumping up too much and just go ahead and eat that $10 million. But that's just my take on the read of the community. It could change a lot in the next year and a half before we start moving that.
So you're saying right now you think, based on all the conditions, that having a level amount and not jumping it up would be better based on where things sit right now?
That's what I've been seeing from the community. Yeah. And from listening to the radio and the news and all of that, not just the people right here.
Right. And Jonah, did you say there were 8 school bond elections on the ballot yesterday? I know Cascade was one of them, and there's failed 55% no, 45% yes is what I saw. But Clatskanie.
Yeah, Clatskanie, the district that we were helping with the bond planning, they passed about 65%.
4 passed, 4 failed.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand Sisters passed as well.
Yes.
Yep. McKinsey did not.
Cook-Heel did not pass.
No.
Yep.
We lost the voting window.
They're recalibrating that and putting it right back up. Technical difficulty. It's coming up shortly.
Is McKinsey near where the fires were?
I'm not too familiar with
that. It's up the McKenzie Highway, that area.
Okay, yeah. Because Blue River got burned out, I think. It'd probably be a good time to build a school and also a hard time to get money out of your community for that.
Yeah.
Santiam Canyon School District passed their first ever school district or school bond a year before the fires, and so they were in the middle of building, redoing a new high school, Santiam High School, and other things up there. Back in the days of the timber before everything changed, they built their middle school up there with cash, and things changed after the equalization. And the state school fund, the local revenues going to the state school fund pot. So they never passed a bond before, and it's been long overdue. So they were in the middle of all those building improvements when the fire hit. Fortunately, the town of Mill City was spared compared to a lot of the rest of the canyon. But anyway, so that's kind of been going on up there. But they did pass a bond, which was exciting.
Since we're discussing and
go ahead, Josh.
Since we're discussing and waiting to vote, there's been something on my mind for a while now that, from a long-range facilities perspective and thinking about district population and students, just about when we're going to canvass a community, asking about whether the consolidation thing, if we're just sticking to questions about that, or if we're going to expand into, are you committed to this district based on maybe, you would leave the district based on curriculum. I guess I have a fear that there's so much stuff going politically right now that people are willing to leave the district in a heartbeat. And I don't know if we're going to go once, why not include possibly those questions? Because that might help the school board too.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Josh. One point of clarification I would make is that it's not going to be canvassing. It's going to be in-person listening sessions. So there won't be any traditional surveys. It'll be actually in-person voices being heard. But I think some of this other stuff is bound to come up as well. And so I think you bring up a good point. But the main focus will be on that word consolidation.
Scott, as you do that listening session in person, are you going to try to also have a tech presence there so that people can view things from a distance?
Yep, Eliza, we spent a long time talking about that and all the details, and it won't just be one listening session. We're talking about multiple, and we've got to nail down what that process will look like. And the other thing that I meant to add before in my comments is, once we get the process nailed down, I will clearly communicate that to all committee members. So everyone has a clear idea from beginning to end, not only what questions we will ask, but exactly how the process will lay out. So just know that as a committee, you'll be getting regular updates from me. So when I come back to share that report with you, you'll have already known the background and how we're doing. So thanks for bringing that up, Eliza.
Yeah, thank you. I just think, because it is a time when people are vacationing, I know that a few times during the work around the strategic visioning plan, I happen to be out of town for work every time. Okay. And if we had been able to have that kind of what we now have, the talents of technology and communication for meetings, then it would have been really useful for me.
Yeah, that's come up also, that exact point, and the technology's improved since then. We intend to make the best use of it. Jonah, they're still working on the survey, so why don't we move on? We'll have to come back to it. I got Derek McElfresh working on it now too.
Yeah, great.
Or we could take a 5-minute break.
Yeah. Well, really, all we had left in the agenda was to just go around the room and kind of talk about, what do we want to see in what does a 20-year plan look like for Silver Falls School District? Set a target for the next meeting. As Scott had mentioned, this is tentative, but getting it on your calendar now, if anything, it probably is additive, and we might have one earlier, but we tentatively targeted September 22nd for the next meeting. And I think as they're working on that, maybe we could just go around the room and kind of voice questions, concerns, that haven't been addressed yet, related to, our work we've done last year and then moving forward as well. So maybe as we're waiting, I can just ask everybody to weigh in. I know it's a short meeting tonight. We just really wanted to kind of wrap up this portion and come back reinvigorated in person next year. What
do you mean next year? Oh, in the fall.
After the summer.
Yeah.
School year. Next school year.
Gotcha. Woo. I mean, I'm committed, but oh.
I hear you, Josh. I hear you.
Great. So I'll start with you, Ray.
Okay. I think I made this point before, but I would like to re-emphasize it, especially with respect to long-range plan. It's a frustration here in the short term that facilities as they exist are, screaming for help, whereas a rethink the process should be that we identify the educational needs and facilities then are secondary or supportive of that need. At the last budget committee meeting, Scott indicated that his team is starting to work on a set of standards throughout the district, and so that there will be some uniformity, I assume, in the curriculum. And the real difficult part of that is to try to project what education might look like 15 or 20 years from now. I think about my own status, because I lived through the splitting of the atom and getting my first computer, and very recently experiencing Facebook. And so the change that I've experienced is dramatic, and I can only I can believe that in the next 20 years that change is going to be even more dramatic. So we need to project, if we can, what those facilities are going to be required to do, and that needs to be part of the discussion in the long term. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Aaron.
Me, Aaron, right?
Yep, you, Aaron.
Okay. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, you know, really honing in on those 10 to 20 years. I know we've talked about trying to get beyond 20 years. I personally, I think that's a little more difficult. You know, who's to know if there's going to be, God forbid, another pandemic, another recession, you know. And I know we try to kind of like neutralize for those over a long term, but I think we really just need to hone in on, you know, what are our immediate needs, trying to use those to guide our 10 and 20 year process. And then also, you know, if there's some room for expansion and building on, but I think we really got to hone into that 20-year mark. And beyond that is really difficult. I'm not saying we don't plan for it. I'm not saying we don't talk about it, but I think we really just need to continue to be focused on that 10 to 20 year window in you know, what we can do in this district. Like I said, I just think anything beyond that is a little difficult. So that was all I had.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Eliza.
I wanted to kind of go back really quickly to the minutes thing, because I feel like if we were able to look at the meeting minutes after our meetings, then we would have a better understanding of what your takeaway is from our meetings. So I appreciate that tonight Scott told us that we can go to him to ask the questions that we have. You know, that's starting to answer that other question of the leadership issue that we've been asking about that doesn't seem to be reflected in your communication with us until possibly, I guess, Scott saying he's the leader. You know, the goal would be to have somebody that we can ask these questions to, and now I guess that we can go to him and not have to ask the entire email group. But just in general, I think it helps me understand what your takeaway is. I also think that it's important that we look at the PSU enrollment a little bit independently and make sure that we do see that the in-town schools will have enough space for their estimated enrollment. And because it looks like we're focusing more on deferred maintenance than new building in any of those places. Right. And that's a key, that in the next 10 to 20 years, that every building have enough space for every student, or that we can possibly look at a way to restructure how students pick their schools.
Great, thanks, Eliza.
Inter-district transfers. I'll be quiet now, thank you.
No, and just to clarify, on the meeting minutes, are you saying you're not getting them, or you're not getting them timely enough?
Well, they're not emailed to committee members directly, and like for a couple months they were being posted on the long range facility planning page, but I haven't seen them from the last two meetings. And it's just that some of our conversation seems redundant, and I did go back and compare and contrast some meeting minutes from the beginning of a meeting that we recently had, where we had that first meeting. They were the minutes from March 3rd, and they there was things in there that, like, for example, that's where Steve Nielsen told us that they had restructured and saved $1.3 million. That's not in those minutes. But I suppose the public could watch 3-hour meetings. I do all the time. But some people will only just look at these little amended versions, and most won't do either. So I just think that the more that we are accurate, that I know that you are understanding what we're asking for, the better off we are in not rehashing the same stuff over and over again.
Gotcha. Great, thanks, Eliza. Jackie.
Okay, so I missed the last meeting, so I apologize if any of this has already been discussed. What I would like, because this is our last meeting until August, is if we're to talk about this within the community, I kind of want a script. I want to know when this current bond will be up, that we're going for a 20-year bond, how much that is per 100,000, what that would look like for improvements across the district, what the name of that bond is, as well as it sounds like we're more of a Band-Aid bond. This is more of a Band-Aid bond. And I think we really need to make sure that that's heard, depending on how we vote or what that is. And maybe we say it's a Band-Aid bond if it's this much, or it's a future bond if it's this much. But I do think we have to be clear with that and not later down the road go, oh, but it wasn't really, we really wanted this, but we got this. We have to be clear. And unfortunately, I'm feeling like I'm not feeling super positive about it. So, I want to be clear with my communication with the community around me and feel comfortable with what I'm saying to them. So it's honest and it's real.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thanks, Jackie. Melissa.
I don't think I have anything new to add. I appreciate Eliza's comments and Jackie's comments, and I can't think of anything new right now.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. April.
I will piggyback on Jackie. I like the idea that if we have some real facts that we can use in our communication, just like the simple stats, that would be helpful. Also, I think it's impossible for us not to plan for very long-term. 10, 20 years isn't enough. We need to build 50-year schools. You have to look at how long we've kept the schools we have now. I mean, we really need to be planning as long-term as possible, because any building we build, we better be planning for it to stay around for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think, and maybe we haven't articulated it well, with the middle school replacement, we would project that that's a 50+ year building. To Bray's point, we would look at, just like we did earlier in the process, the different educational models and pedagogy, and how does that facility support teaching and learning, and how is it flexible and adaptable and agile for future proofing and for students, and how could it flex, in a pandemic potentially, in those kinds of scenarios. So, so I guess, and my apologies if I haven't communicated.
No, I understand that. I just was thinking more with all of our other buildings that, I mean, we are trying to kind of Band-Aid all of our rural school buildings. And I just think it would be good if we start actually planning, that we can tell the community, we're going to do this and this building's going to last, or there's nothing we can do to make this building last. So we need to start thinking about this. And that's, I think, some of what Jackie's saying, like, if we go to our community now and say we want to pass a $70 million bond, but really as a long-term planning committee, we know that that's not nearly enough, and we're going to have to pass another bond not very long from now. Like, I want to know that now. I don't want to communicate. I mean, that's been part of the problem in the community before, is not understanding the bonds and what they meant and how much would get done with them. So I just think we really need to have a clear picture on all the buildings and how long they're going to last and what we're going to do to make them last or to replace them eventually.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thanks, April.
Thanks.
Brett.
I don't think I have anything new to add besides I think it's I think reaching out to the KA community specifically is a really good idea. And then also just what was said by April and Jackie, like we've talked about many times, we need to be honest with the community. We need to make promises and we need to follow through if we have any hope of passing this one and any bonds in the future. So however clear we can be and whatever script we can come up with, I think would be good so we can go out and be good spokesmen for it.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Tom.
I'm going to piggyback on that. The 100-year structure idea, I really think is critical. We have all of our structures operating, I mean, except for the high school, all of our structures are operating over 50 years at this point. And one of the things I was thinking about as I saw some sketches was that having a model where there's these different kind of like modules in the building of different elevations and stuff. It's hard to adapt a building when you have multiple different pieces kind of stuck together. So I think part of the recommendation of the committee going forward really is to consider a structure that has a very solid perimeter and floor plans, but you could actually take walls out and rebuild them in different locations very easily, and there'd be sufficient ceiling space for utilities and stuff. And it's a very primitive part of construction, but something that has not really been included in a lot of our discussion or in any of our buildings. And I just kind of wanted to add that in. It kind of ties in with what Ray was saying as well. So, and then that would also, I think, ties in with clear bond communication. Having a really, one of the things as you look through the last 30-year history of our district, what the bonds represented when you actually voted on them was often either hard to understand or actually just unclear. Like the bond in '94 for the high school said, do you want to vote for a new high school, $15 million? And they're literally like, yeah. And then they got a school that held 9th grade, not a whole school. And they're like, we got lied to. It really caused unhappiness.
Right.
And then the last thing is, I've been trying to, I know we've talked about the Awesome grant quite a bit. I am sorry, I must have missed it. I don't know what TAP grant is short for, and I tried looking it up. I can't find it.
It's Technical Assistance Program. So it's ODE. They give TAP grants for a variety of things. This one is for long-range facility planning. You also got one for facility assessment. So you got, I think, 20,000 for that one is my guess, 20 to 25. You get 25 for long-range facility planning. You can get one for environmental analysis. And then there's the seismic analysis as well. So there's a variety of different kinds of TAP grants that fall between the 20 to 25,000 range as a way to encourage and incentivize districts to go through a process much like this one to identify what those needs are for the next bond and for that 10-year plan.
So just to be clear, I heard it stated that we really should get this wrapped up by December so we can qualify for the TAP grant. It doesn't sound like it's a vast amount of money. It's helpful, but it's not actually a game changer. Am I misunderstanding?
The TAP.
So the timeline is for the Awesome grant, Tom. It's the Awesome grant is $4 million, and that's worth making the deadline. The TAP grant, you've already received those, and as Jonah's indicated, there's 4 categories for those grants. The Awesome grant, Oregon School Capital Improvement Match, has a deadline that they set up based on when you might run a bond. Every school district qualifies based on your number, and one of the factors is free and reduced lunch that tells whether how high you are up on the list of qualifications. The first step in the process is to be rated, which again, it's based on need. Then you have to complete the complete the long-range facility plan and have that approved. Then you apply for the Awesome grant. And once your application is submitted for the Awesome grant, then the state allocates whether you've qualified for the grant. And that's based on your priority number. So it's pretty simple. The deadline, they're in the process of changing the deadlines. And it used to be basically 6 months or 9 months before you would run a bond. But that's in the process of being changed. So by getting the long-range facility plan before the end of 2020 would qualify, you would be in line to qualify for a June bond a May bond should you choose to go for it. It also, you roll over into the next year so you could qualify for a November bond. So
we would want that in what we say to the public. I just want to reiterate that. That needs to be put into the script so we can reiterate that this is a timeline. This is what we're going to get if we pass this in this amount of time.
Exactly. Yeah. And you will know, they do it within a week. So once you apply within a week, you know that you've qualified. And they carry it over. So in the past, it's only a program that's about 3 or 4 years old. They have been able to qualify everybody who has passed a bond, but that might not always be the case.
So when I was reading about it, I saw the $4 million mark, but I saw a comment in the discussion on the Awesome grant that there are situations where a district might qualify for an $8 million bond. And what would those conditions be? Do you know?
I don't know. When they first introduced it's a detail that I haven't drilled down on. When they first introduced the Awesome grant, they had grants in the amount of $2, $4, and $8 million. And now they've just listed everybody at $4 million. So I'm sorry, Tom, but it is certainly something that ought to be investigated. And I would imagine it's based on, again, on need, which is there's a number, your number of students and your number of free and reduced lunch and a number of factors that I haven't chased down. So I don't know what happened to the 4 and 8.
Does it have anything to do with just the condition of the structures in the district?
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I would like, this is anecdotal. So this process has been in place or has been in development. The school funding at the state level has been in development for almost 12 years. Under Kitzhaber, they created the Governor's Commission on School Facilities. And the first generation in a couple of governors down the road actually created a system that gets this $4 million Awesome grant. And the point of the grant, the TAP grants and the Awesome match is to start funding capital improvements in Oregon schools, because Washington does it, other states do it. Oregon is has always been basically on the responsibility of the voters in that school district. The second part of it is to get the legislature to start funding schools. They always ask the same question: how much do you need? How much is the problem? And so this interim step is they've created this awesome grant so that school districts can begin to get some money. But the TAP grant is creating a database that every school district in the state will be evaluated. And then the legislature or ODE will have a number of the entire state. What's the condition of our schools, which is pretty tough statewide. We do work statewide. And so once they accumulate all this information, the hope is that they can create a more robust program that goes back up to that $8 million. It's limited about the funding of the legislature. And I apologize for the lengthy explanation, but I'm passionate about it. And I think we really need to get to funding our schools.
Based on, I missed some of the details of what you just said, but is there, based on what you understand, is there any option for us to get the $8 million, or we're pretty much locked in at 4, would you guess?
I would guess you're locked in at 4.
That's kind of been most districts lately.
Yeah. Like I said, they started out with a varying range. I know that Gresham got 8 million, and that was 2 years ago.
Well, no, that's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Sorry for my pontificating.
As we keep going down the list, I don't know if everybody's seen in the chat, there's a link to, I presume this is the survey, Maddie. Here. Yeah. There you go. So as we're going through, if you guys and gals can go through and make this selection there, and I'll keep going down the list here. Who did I hear from? Lauren, did I hear from you yet?
Nope, not yet. I don't really have a lot to add other than I really appreciate all the views that have been shared by all these committee members. And especially, honestly, Richard's discussing about how we need to better fund our school buildings. You know, it's a problem throughout the state for sure. And that's it.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Josh.
Yeah. All right. I got a couple things. One, I just want to thank Scott for helping with that kind of more focused leadership. That really helps me a lot. Also, Scott, thanks for the just willingness to be available. I think you're kind of crazy considering everything else going on. And I'm sure your wife and kids think you're nuts too. Question 5 maps. This is a question probably for Steve and Scott. Did we buy that software?
5 maps is one of 5 different modules or products within what's called Forecast 5 Analytics. And we use 3 of the 5, 5 cast and 5 site, and then 5 maps we added to this to our products when we did the boundary work group. So yes, we did add that at a cost. I don't remember the exact cost, but there'll be a kind of an annual amount. It was well, I'll have to look it up, but you know, somewhere in the $5,000 to $6,000 range, I think it was, because there was some implementation and training. And then I think the annual cost is something less for that specific module. So it is something we plan on. You know, we knew that it would be a great tool for the boundary work group, and it was, because it helped us get through that work even more quickly than, you know, back in the old days when we didn't have those tools. And we also knew that it would be something that would be useful for other things down the road. So yes, we will have access to that moving forward.
The reason I'm asking that question is myself being a kid who went to Eugene Field, Robert Frost, and Mark Twain, and being able to live in town, I found it imperative being able to bike to all those schools and walk. And we are so fortunate that we live in such a safe community that we can, I feel like, still do that. The reason I'm asking about 5 maps is like figuring out where these individual students are that are going to the particular schools, and having not forcing kids to bus if they don't want to because of the distance they are away from school. I do have a fear that if the in-town population continues to grow, that we're going to have to bus kids to the outer district schools or out of the outer lying schools where there's actually room to have them. So that's why I was asking the question.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that's definitely something the product provides. We have our entire student database, in the system and they're plotted on the map. So that's something that will just continue with each year's student data that we have.
Thanks, Steve. I do a lot of awesome work, and I appreciate all the work you've been doing this year with the crazy COVID year. Last thing I want to mention is these ADA improvements, and I don't know if in any one of these priorities here, are ADA improvements listed in here, Lauren, at all, or is that not on here?
Yeah, there's ADA improvements should be listed in there.
Okay, so we are kind of trying to address those possibly.
Yeah, those really start picking up mostly in priority 2, and then priority 3 would have those as well.
Good. I'm just nervous in this litigious society we live in that we are one bad incident away from getting our butts handed to us. So that's why I was asking. So I'm glad we're addressing those. That's my list. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks, Josh. And then I had a question about this level levy rate for 130. So I'll just pull this up as we go here. It's a little over $3 over the course of 30 years. Peter.
Yeah, not to repeat anything that's already been said, but a lot of good comments. Just kind of following back to my concerns about doing a test of a option here, and it's not because I don't like one of the options. It's because the option isn't complete for a long-range facility plan. Going back to what kind of Ray commented on in the beginning, we're a long-range facility planning committee that's looking at deferred maintenance. And I'm not saying any one person failed, but because of deferred maintenance and the way we fund our schools and maintaining them, the long-range plan failed, basically, because even though a roof has a life, that's part of the planning process. So I know we can't go back in time, so a bond has to include that deferred maintenance. But that's just half the option. We kind of going on what Jackie said and some others, we've got to have a clear message to the community, because depending on what level's passed, even if it's at the maximum, there's going to be capacity issues in the Robert Frost Mark Twain if things keep moving forward with development. So it wasn't necessarily a problem of approving half of it. That's kind of what I'm looking at here. That's half. We still have another portion to do. And so as long as we go going forward with that thinking, and I think that's what was discussed, I wouldn't know if it was agreed upon or consensus was given, but that's kind of my hesitancy. It's only half of the project that we're really tasked to do here. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Aaron.
My big concern is all of the discussion, there you go, sorry, and everything has surrounded this bond passing. I'm curious if we're going to discuss or what the plan's going to be if the bond doesn't pass. And what is the 5 and 10 and 20-year plan if we don't pass a bond? How are we going to take care of all these buildings? It's fun. You know, how are we going to get all these things fixed and done and take care of all these very old buildings if we don't pass a bond?
I think one thing to keep in mind is that our annual budget is around 42 million. And so what will we do if the bond doesn't pass? I would say not much.
Yeah, so that's an issue for me.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a big issue.
Yeah, I mean, what, you know, all these roofs and all that, like,
yep,
we gonna have leaks, you know, and I mean, I worked at Eugene Field, like that,
Yeah.
happened. So what's going to happen then?
It's a good question there. Lisa.
I think it'll be good to see the outcome of Scott's committee work when he works on that with the K-8s to really get a feel of where they're at. I think that'll be key information, and also getting out the pertinent information they need to make good decisions about their buildings. Also, it'll be interesting to see where the district falls out, or where we come to post-pandemic as far as enrollment and just kind of the feel of where everybody's at.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Lisa. Let's see, Brandon.
I have one comment. It's kind of, there's a few people, and I don't think they're wrong, that you need to think about the taxpayer in this scenario. But as a person with a young family who plans on being here a long time, I think it's not a black and white where the least amount is best for the taxpayer, because I think a lot of people with just plans on being here long term see a Band-Aid and they go, well, that's great. The bill isn't that big now, but right when it's up, we're going to have to go through this process all over again. And we'll have the same arguments as a town, because I understand it's a very polarized just set of scenarios out there with this community. But I think just saying that if we're thinking about the taxpayers, okay, let's make it the least amount possible. As a younger family, I don't see that as just cut and dry. I see that as next time in 15 years, that 64 million is going to be 120 million that we're doing to put Band-Aids. So that's my comment for tonight. Just if we're thinking about the taxpayers, we can't just be thinking least amount, push it down the road. So.
Right. Great, thanks, Brandon. Wally.
Yeah, at the beginning of the meeting, Ray talked about concerned about deferred maintenance and a bond. That kind of resonates with me. The intent of a bond is for capital improvements, not necessarily deferred maintenance. And I've seen other districts go for bonds for deferred maintenance, and it gets to be a really slippery slope. And it could actually, I think I mentioned before, that people look for reasons not to vote for a bond. And that, if it's not crafted really well, that could be another reason for somebody not to support a bond.
Gotcha. Thanks, Wally. Sean.
So yeah, it does appear we're having good conversation about the deferred maintenance part. You know, I'm having a growing realization about the cost with all of this. When you start thinking of the deferred maintenance piece, what do we need right now to make schools up to date for today? And then also be looking 10 to 20 years down the line, you really start thinking, can we do it for 130 million?
Right.
And then, you know, you start hearing some people saying, well, what about 50 years, which is excellent. We all got to be thinking along those lines. I'm just starting to realize, how are we going to be able to communicate this well enough that it's probably going to need to be on the upper end. And I get, you know, the deferred maintenance piece too. I've been working for the district for 20 years. I grew up here too, but 20 years as an employee, deferred maintenance has been the constant conversation through all of that time. But if we get right down to it, a lot of this deferred maintenance is not a Band-Aid, it's surgery. And it's expensive, you know. And so I think, you know, some of the stuff just to make it kind of modern for today is the Band-Aid, but a lot of that deferred maintenance, it's surgery that's needed to happen for quite some time. So those are my thoughts.
Great, thanks, Sean. I don't know if I missed anybody. Did everybody have a chance to vote?
Well, I'll make that announcement. Derek redid the survey and put it in as a link. It's in a Google form. And so if you can click that, it should take you to that.
So, John, I was just going to have a couple statistical clarifications in my comments.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Absolutely.
So I was just going to say, I think I said earlier that our permanent tax rate just for general operating for the general fund was 4.8. It's 4.5458 per thousand. So if our average bond rate right now is about $2 or just slightly over $2, the average taxpayer is paying about $6.55 per thousand of assessed value every year. On page 2 of Lauren's presentation, there's a great 20-year history of the property values in our school district, and I'm sure she touched on it. But just to kind of equate this to what I think then can become some relatively simple math, the Measure 5 real market value in our school district is about $3.2 billion right now. Interesting, it was just over $1 billion 20 years ago. So it's grown by 200%. The assessed value, that by which the taxes are based on, was a little over 810 million in 2001, and has grown to slightly over $2 billion this year. So it's approximately 67% of the real market value. So, for some people, assessed and real market value might be real close to each other, and for other people, there could be quite a gap. But just on average, it's about 67%. So, if you looked at a $500,000 home market value, that would on average be a $335,000 of assessed value based on the averages. Just to kind of put that in perspective. So if we used, we're using the $2 billion number for assessed value. Here's an easy way to break it down. That is 2 million thousands. So, for example, for the 2021 budget, we had to levy about $4.2 million to meet our debt service for the general obligation bond. And so if you just take a round number and say $4 million, if you take the 2 million thousands and we needed $4 million, there's your $2 per thousand that we're paying. We bring in just under $9 million in property taxes from the taxpayers for the general operating fund each year. Well, again, you have your 2 million thousands, and our permanent rate is 4.5458. Well, that's how you get to almost $9 million in property taxes in the general operating fund. So, and Jackie, I just wanted to say, if you go back to April's meeting on the website, and the last link called Analysis SFSD GO 2023, 32521. That is the Piper Sandler presentation that has these graphs and costs. And if you have any questions on that, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. And also, Lauren did a 20 or 30-minute presentation at that meeting. I was not there, but that would also be something that you could, watch on video too. If
Perfect.
But,
and I appreciate that. And Steve, one thing that would be kind of interesting for the historical perspective of our voters is, as the bond continued to fail, the last bond, it would be nice to say, if you would have voted for it at this point, this is what it would cost you. Mm-hmm. If you would have voted for it at this point, it would have cost you this. If you would have voted and finally it passed, at this point, this is what the cost was.
Yeah.
So by not passing it, it actually cost you more money in the end. Now, again, I want to make sure it's all clear, and you're the guy that knows the numbers far more than I do. Is that something we could gather that information and look at the changes from that first bond failure, the second bond failure, and just say, you know, this is what happened last time. And in the end, it really cost you more than if you would have voted for it at the beginning.
Yeah, we could definitely go back and look at those numbers and try to put an analysis together this summer. So
yeah, and it like a hard dollar. Yes, it's going to cost you more, but they're going to go, whatever, it cost me more. But if it would be nice to say that it actually costs you per 100,000 this much more.
Yeah.
Can I haven't commented, but can I piggyback off what Jackie said? I think the other thing that kind of goes along with that is, where would we be had we passed those as far as the timeline of paying them off and being ready to do more? Because I am, for one, so frustrated at the fact that this has been almost, by the time, if we're talking 2023 to going for the bond, or even 2022, getting construction started, getting it done, we'll be almost at 10 years since we closed Eugene Field and moved into the middle school. 10 years of a Band-Aid building that we're doing maintenance to have to keep open on a part we can't even use. And that's the part of it I think that is so unbelievably frustrating, is yes, the cost that we missed out on, but the time. Because like we said earlier, we're using a bond to do deferred maintenance, and we have no choice. Because if we only do a bond right now for capital improvements, where's the rest of the money going to come from to do all the other deferred maintenance? It's going to come out of our kids' education funds.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is something that really needs to be pounded home when we start talking about this, is urgency. And I still think 2023 is too late. I think we need to go now. It's when it first started, the board decided to take a year off of talking about facilities. And I don't understand how we can do that when we're in the position that we're in. So that's one of the things I think we have to pound home is, over time, how much have we cost ourselves in money, but also time lost of paying off the bonds, that now we're going to be even more behind when we get there.
Steve, what were you talking about? That 6.5? That wasn't $6 per thousand to the taxpayer.
Well, if you add the what taxpayers pay just for the general operating property taxes for the general operating, we have a permanent rate of 4.5458 per $1,000 of assessed value, and then the average cost per thousand right now for the taxpayer is about $2.03 on our bonded debt. So if you combine those two numbers, you're looking at about $6.55 per $1,000 of assessed value between those two figures. Every school district has a permanent rate, which was locked in back in the 90s when they did the equalization, the Measure 5 and the Measure 50 stuff. So that number's static, but you got to take that into account in terms of total cost that the taxpayer has.
Got you. So that 4.5458. And then whatever bond we would go is based on these slides that Jonah was on.
With the school district comparisons, yeah, you can. Yeah. That had the permanent and the bond, didn't it, Jonah? Or was it just the bond? The bonds. Oh, that was just the bonds. Yeah, there's also a graph that they do, and I'll have to see if they have an updated one. I'm sure I could get it from Piper Sandler. They do, that has comparable districts, and it has the combined permanent rate plus the bond rate for the total by district, because not every school district has the same permanent rate. So that's always interesting to look at as well when you're comparing other districts. But this one at least shows what districts have a bond out there and which ones don't.
What percentage of our operating budget comes from that 4.46?
Well, the property taxes, if it's just slightly under $9 million on roughly a $45 million general fund budget, and the property taxes are local revenues. They're money that our taxpayers pay to the county, and Marion and Clackamas counties pay to us, but they are really part of the state school fund formula. So if the state says we're paying you $9,000 per average daily membership weighted, they'll take that number, the 9,000 or whatever the amount per ADMW is, times the ADMW, and say this is your total formula revenue. So let's just, for round numbers purposes, say our total formula revenue is $40 million. And if we receive $10 million in property taxes, they're going to take that $10 million out, and the state will take out of the state general fund budget, funded by income taxes and other sources, but primarily income taxes. They'll pay us $30 million. So the $10 million is really just part of our total formula revenue that's part of the state school fund. And there's other local revenues as well, like the common school fund, the county school fund, state timber, federal timber. Those are all part of the formula and go into the pot.
So Steve, is that number calculated the same way as our bonding capacity, in that having less commercial property hurts us in what we pay for the general fund, that 4.5%?
Are you talking about the permanent rate of $4.54 per?
Right. So one of the things we keep hearing is one of our disadvantages for bonds is we don't have a lot of commercial real estate to help drop that rate down to the homeowners. Is the general fund rate calculated using that same type of formula?
Well, anyone that has assessed value in our school district pays, property taxes.
The more commercial property would equal a higher value and less to the specific homeowners, possibly.
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would say too, just to talk about the maintenance part, Colin, I agree with everything you said about, losing, time and, having inflation and all of that. It's just going to cost more, the longer we go. But especially now too, we've gone through this recent, in the last 6 to 8 months, major spike in costs on materials. But I was going to say that, fortunately, going back to what Richard said, the state about 10 or 12 years ago finally started to set some programs up to help fund local governments for facilities, especially schools. And they started with statewide seismic assessments that were done on every school in the state. And then they started the seismic grants. That started here about 6 or 7 years ago. Unfortunately, the Silver Falls School District received 2 of the first 13 grants. It started out very small. It was the Scotts Mills and Butte Creek, and that was because of the location near to the 93 spring breakquake in Malala. And then we've received 4 other ones since then. And, we have Scotts Mills, Victor Point, Mark Twain, the Robert Frost Play Area, and I think 5 more, actually, the old high school gym. So I think we've stated this before, but, I think even though we still have a lot out there for warm, safe, and dry and deferred maintenance, I'm very pleased with the work of the last 6 years in terms of what we've been able to take advantage of from the state. That's still very new, about $7 million worth of seismic grant work. We also just last year completed about a $2 million project with our Senate Bill 1149 energy efficient project money that the district's been receiving since 2001. And we did lighting upgrades in every building in the district with more energy efficient lighting that is actually saving our general fund budget every year moving forward. So we were able to use those funds to help with that. And then, with the sale of Eugene Field, we were able for a few years to bump up our budget for project work in the general fund, and also some additional funds we had in our capital project fund to be able to do more major projects around the district. But that's become very limited now. On an annual basis, our maintenance budget in the general fund is anywhere from $4.2 to $4.5 million, which is about 10% of the general fund budget, and that includes all of our labor, our maintenance workers and custodians, and that type of thing. And then we, have our utility costs and insurance for property and those things. And when it all shakes out, we might have anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 just for deferred maintenance projects, and that's just not very much. So fortunately, the state has done more, and fortunately, they've created this awesome grant to go along with bond projects that is something that didn't exist before. That's much more helpful. But we still have a lot to do. There's no question about it. The last thing I wanted to say, again, Richard was talking about the TAP grant and the Awesome grant. So I just wanted to provide some clarity. The Awesome grant is something that, Richard, what did you say the deadline was for being able to do a 2022 bond? So I guess what I want to say about that was just whether we do that or not. I mean, I think it's looking more likely that this could be a May 2023 or November 2023 deal. November 2022 would be the earliest we could look to do, but that would still be a tight timeline, even if this process wrapped up in November and December. My chief concern with the December deadline for the ODE prescribed 10-year plan has to do with the TAP grant. That money is received in arrears. And is only received after the plan has been completed, submitted, and reviewed by ODE. And that grant deadline is 12/31/2021. And we would get our $25,000 for going through this process. We did receive $20,000 to do our facility assessment report, which was done, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago. So that's the TAP grant. The Awesome grant has different deadline dates based on the year that you're looking at. You know, you have to have it a certain amount of time before you would go for a bond. And the other part of it too is, I believe this program is subject to the biennial state budget approval process by the legislature. So there's no guarantee it would continue to be there, but we haven't heard that it won't be either.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification, Steve. You're spot on.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
And so as long as we, like we were talking earlier about what our 10-year plan is, if it doesn't pass and all that, as long as we just submit that our 10-year plan is to go for a bond to fix this, this, and this, that qualifies. You don't have to have a backup plan, a plan B. So if the bond fails, does our second plan B 10-year plan work for the requirement for that? I mean, you basically just have to have a plan. It doesn't have to be approved by a bond or anything.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean a district's going for a bond anytime soon. You know, it's just a specific a formatted long-range facility plan with at least a 10-year scope. Richard and Jonah could speak better to it than I can, but
yeah, we just wrapped up Paisley School District's long-range facility plan, and they're a farming community, and they're not going to run a bond. They just have a deferred maintenance plan for the next prioritized deferred maintenance plan that they can use as funding becomes available. So you don't really have to execute anything. You have to complete the plan and fill out the prescribed submittal requirements.
Great. Well, really good discussion. Did everybody have a chance to vote on the?
Yeah, I think everybody did, Jonah.
Great. Is there we can share that, Maddie, or is that possible? Or
I checked with Derek. I'll email it out to everyone. He said 14 people voted, and I think that's 14 of our committee members who are present tonight. I counted. I hope I counted right.
We're up to 16 now.
Okay.
Great. Perfect.
Quick question. Haven't we already completed basically our state plan with all of the data that's been gathered and put it into the form, and question of just writing the report and sending it in?
Yeah, I mean, Ray, we have gathered the information that we would need to write the report, if that's your question.
Yeah, thank you.
A big part of this process is really that community engagement via committee. But yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to pass a bond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think one thing that was just abundantly clear from the comments tonight is the need for that script and kind of really honing that message down. And so, Scott and Steve and Lauren, we can work with you here in the next, couple days to really give you kind of our feedback on that and have you craft that how, best fits for the district. just for messaging for the summer. And then, you know, that'll get augmented and modified and updated for the actual bond planning when that does happen. And then based on community feedback and the K-8 work group feedback.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jonah. And I just wanted to let the committee know that we will do everything we can to get that out to the committee before you leave for summer. If not before then, we'd have to see how soon we can put that together. But I read you loud and clear.
And then that's all I had. Did anybody else have anything else? And we kind of finished early.
Just a quick question for Scott. So these community outreach kind of forums that we're going to do publicly, are you going to post when those are going to be so that these members can possibly attend?
Yes, and I'll have more details once we get the work group together, once we nail down exactly what the process is going to look like. But what I can tell you also as a committee is that all of the public meeting notices, the way we approach meetings, just like we did the boundary, which we still post, we record, we have live video feeds, all of that will be consistent that you will see in the community town halls. I'm reluctant to share any details because this is going to be the work of the work group to lay out the process. I can tell you that it's part of how I do business, and you know, with the consistency piece, making sure that our practice of receiving feedback, that we follow the same type of format.
Great.
And I see Tom asked, what are the poll results? And I'm asking Derek to get those to me. And then if he gets them to me right now, I'll have him put it in the comments. If not, I'll email them right out to you.
You want me to take a screenshot and post it?
That would be great. That'd be great, Maddie.
Just a moment.
And then I'm going to, while she's doing that, there's a question about the total needs. So let me pull that up here real quick. I don't know if you recall, in the last couple presentations, we had that very long spreadsheet that's very impossible to read. But that really shows kind of those total needs. And this does not include project development costs or escalation. So, you know, you'd have to tack on 38% and then another 5.6 if we're tracking that same metric here. But this is that total, just for those as identified by that facility assessment. You know, and this doesn't include inflation up to this point either. So that's kind of that. That's just if you did the total Band-Aid approach. But as we know, and even when we were getting ready for these meetings, Lauren and I worked some of those numbers just because they were already too low. So.
Okay, I can share the results if I can share my screen.
There you go.
Can you see?
Can see.
Yep.
So it definitely looks like on the higher end, on the 90 and the priority 3 and the 130. Great.
Oh, shoot.
Great. Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, if you could send me that and then send me the chat log as well. We'll get those minutes out. And then Scott and Steve, we'll work with you here in the next couple of days to start thinking about that script. That'd
be great.
But with that, I don't have anything else unless anybody else has anything. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you soon.